tried to wear my most prideful, the Eevee evolutions.
Mine just says equality.
Mm-hmm. I have an actual pride shirt, but it's at my parents' house. So this is the next gayest thing. Okay, hello everybody. I am Will.
And I'm Kristen.
This is So I'm Watching This Show, your twice weekly pop culture podcast where we talk about movies, TV, music, and more. And as always, this is a spoiler show, so you have been warned. On today's episode, we are going to do a deep dive into your herstory with the 1990s documentary, Paris is Burning.
You have space to do all that you intend to.
This movie is about the ball circuit. A competition amongst gay people under one roof.
It's like crossing into the looking glass.
A house, their families, kids with broken homes, or no home at all.
So, woo? Is that what we're going with?
No. I'm real low woo levels right now. I am sick. I am cold and also sweating. I'm like not in a great place right now.
Well, we're back in an old setup, so I feel like anything is going to like fail at any given moment. And also, I'm wearing sound canceling headphones, so it's a particularly hellish experience. Yeah, so this is our fourth Pride month, I think, and
third. 2018 is when we started releasing episodes.
And today's 2021.
Yeah,
that's 4.
Oh shit, you're right.
You fight me on this every time.
I don't like it.
Yeah, so this is our fourth Pride month, and each year we've tried to pick something, kind of gay to cover, and we've done varying levels of seriousness and stuff, and this year I thought, let's go a little bit deeper into the history and let's do Paris is Burning, which I was only marginally familiar with. I was familiar with the title for quite a while, and I knew it was a gay documentary, but I really didn't know specifically what it was. This episode's a doozy. I'm very kind of not nervous. I'm always nervous whenever I'm talking about something like this because I want to speak correctly. I don't want to be flippant about like real and serious things. And there's a lot of pressure, from the community to get it right. You know what I mean? So it's the kind of thing that it can kind of feel like the more work you do, the more work you have to do. Like,
sure.
I feel like I'm getting further away from it somehow because apparently this documentary, I was doing some research after the fact, and this documentary is controversial.
Oh, really?
A lot of the participants didn't like it, and I learned a word called the imperial gaze.
I can understand why some of them maybe didn't like it, but also, I don't know, I guess not having experienced it, it felt pretty real.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel like they were making it up.
Well, basically, it's the woman who directed it. It's Jenny Livingston, I think was her name.
Yeah.
And she is a queer woman. However, she was not part of the culture. So
right.
Another term that I saw used was cultural tourism. And there's apparently a series of, there's apparently many documentaries, but there's a couple really prominent ones. And in an ideal world, especially if we were still focused on only the podcast, I would have recommended doing all 3 of them. But for YouTube, I think it's easier, or it makes more sense to focus on one thing at a time. But there's a documentary from 1968 called The Queen, and it's about a gay beauty pageant in the 60s. And it's wild from what I was seeing. And then there's a newer one from 2016 called Kiki, and it's a documentary by the people in the community about the community they're part of. So it's less looking in and more, this is who we are.
Yeah.
And
I think that's that's definitely interesting. And I like that there is that exists now. But I also think sometimes people fundamentally misunderstand what a documentarian's role is. And it is to be outside. They're
observe.
like anthropologists. You're outside of the scenario, documenting what you see as it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of frustrates me when people are like, I don't like how I came across in that. And it's like, well,
you also, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And any starting point, especially if you're coming from a place of naivety or ignorance or whatever, any starting place is going to be kind of, we'll go with problematic. I mean, you're going to have kind of
I'm
like,
just like, I'm really curious because it didn't even seem like disrespectful or anything. That like sometimes documentaries can feel disrespectful to the subjects, and it just felt like recordings of
it
people
also
in their natural habitat.
So yeah, I wanted to preface that. I wanted to I like to hedge my bets in that way. But
Sure.
moving into the documentary, it was fascinating. It was about several things as far as I'm concerned. And frankly, as much as and actually the last thing I'll say before getting into it is, I think when you're dealing with something like, in particular, gay history and in particular gay history regarding people of color, we don't know the history. It's
Sure.
not there. It's not recorded. It's not memorized. And so, these balls, the ball culture apparently goes back to the 1800s. And there were times where apparently in like the 20s and into the 30s, it was kind of popular. And then we know how the 30s and 40s went, and everything went back underground.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I feel like at a certain point we have to pick starting points. We have to pick Stonewall. We have to pick, the AIDS crisis. We have to pick certain things to be like, okay, we are able to know what happened here and who these people are. So this is where we're starting, and this is where we're going to continue the legacies. And so watching this documentary, like I said, it was fascinating to me because it was about several things. It's about, the gay experience at this time period. It's about the ball culture. It's about New York City. It's about the 80s. I mean, this is as much an indictment about what the 80s was like as it, like all
Reagan's America.
all the conversations about wealth and like the riches and the fantasy and the excess.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be a desire for wealth and a desire for luxury and a desire for more. But it feels like culturally it kind of comes and goes a little bit. And we're in a lull right now.
Yeah.
We're watching them talk about this stuff. It felt gauche.
Well, I mean, that's the stuff for me that actually sort of made me the saddest, I guess, is because almost every one of them were like, I'd like to be really successful and I'd like to be a household name, but if I can't have that, I just want to have a lot of money. And I was like, I just don't think any of them got a lot of money. It seems like such a graspable dream, I just want to have money.
Well, it's also the kind of thing that it's like, ironically, they end up having fame and success. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to being a household name, but also, I mean, this is only 30 years ago. The jury's still out historically. And so to think that they might get that, but not in life, it's like...
Yeah, that's sad.
There is a earnestness and a bleakness to this that I wasn't quite prepared for.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it either. There was like a melancholy over the whole thing that I just was like, oh, I'm sick and it's Saturday morning. And I was just like, this is quite the confluence of events that's happening right now.
Uh-huh. So I think something that was fascinating about watching this is how much of it I kind of already knew.
Yeah, some of it.
Well, a lot of it, because, obviously we're in the year 2021 and season 13 of RuPaul's Drag Race just ended.
Yeah.
So a lot of these terms have become way more mainstream. What was sort of shocking to me was how far back so much of it goes. Like, throwing shade, that's something I learned in like 2013.
Yeah, I was going to say, not that long ago.
And even Kiki. It's like, I know the word Kiki from the Scissor Sisters song from like 2012. And I always understood it to mean slumber party, but I guess it actually means like banter. Like it means like back and like a fun back and forth.
Sure, okay. I mean, one could have that at a slumber party.
Well, I guess the slumber party came from the Scissor Sisters song.
Let's have a kiki.
I wanna have a kiki.
Lock the doors.
Right.
Let's have a kiki. Motherfucker.
I'm gonna let you have it.
Let's have a kiki. I wanna have a kiki. Dive, turn, work. Let's have a kiki.
We are gonna serve.
And work and turn.
And honey.
I think that the implications of that was like, we can't go out, so we're going to have a slumber party and kiki.
Gotcha.
And I think, and that's how language works. I find it fascinating. And the reading, I didn't know that was that far back.
We kind of did, because I recognized all of those clips of that queen because we just watched something on The Take, I think.
Yeah.
They had pulled those clips,
Mm-hmm. That was Dorian Corey.
Yeah.
I've always had a hard time fitting in general, but especially in the gay community, because I've always felt like there's so many rules. And it always felt like there was so much judgment.
Mm.
And this was steeped in that.
Yeah.
And I understand living in this reality was extremely difficult. It was very fight or flight. It was very survival of the fittest and all that. And I can, we've talked a lot about growing up gay. It's like, for many people growing up gay, you're growing up in a survival mode, and that can bring out, an aggressiveness a lot of times, or a viciousness with certain people. And also I can see how, like, if you had to work so hard to accomplish something, and then someone, came up underneath you and seemingly had an easier time because of the work you did, but didn't necessarily credit or respect you in that way. I definitely understand how it happens, but there was just there were a lot of rules, and there was a lot of it fascinated me seeing some of the older members talking about the children.
Yeah.
And how hard the children are. And there was a lot of back in my day, it was about the glamour, but the kids these days, I even tried to write down.
It's only about the designer now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, that literal same complaint is being lobbed left and right today. And it is fascinating seeing something become so mainstream and yet still be niche.
Yeah.
And also becoming so just seeing something grow, because the themes or the categories in the ball, it was really weird how much of these fantasies were about assimilation.
Yes, I clocked that too. I was like, oh. And what I actually did think it was fun and interesting that a lot of the categories were still dress up in boy clothes.
Mm-hmm.
It was, but pass yourself off as a straight man.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, that is a level of, I don't know, costuming and
it's interesting.
Play acting. It's very interesting, but at the same time, it is, I don't know the word I want to use, but again, it made me sort of sad, where I was like, that's the pinnacle. And today it's just God, straight men don't try to be like that. Why would you do that?
They have a total meltdown about a fur coat in one scene.
Yeah.
It's
so funny.
Whether it's a man's
the
coat.
buttons are on the right. The buttons are on the right. He wouldn't stop saying it. It was hilarious.
The highest goal or the highest compliment could be passing.
Yeah.
And they really played it fast and loose with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's a character, Venus Extravaganza, that we check in with through the entire documentary. And it's so wild because the whole time we're watching it, I was sort of watching it with this sense of impending doom.
Yeah.
There was just something about her where I'm like, you are not prepared for it. I wouldn't ever be that fearless.
No. Yeah. She was like, I'm who I am and get out of the way. And I was like,
but she was also,
she was 1987.
She was very sweet, and she was very idealistic and very sort of,
I don't feel that there's anything mannish about me, except maybe what I might have between me down there. which is my little personal thing. So I guess that's why I want my sex change, to make myself complete.
I am aware that, transgender people are not new. I'm aware that it's not, it's as old as time. There's Greek myths, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
so why we're pretending this is a new fad, I don't know. But there's a difference between having that knowledge and understanding or witnessing it,
Right.
and just, we really think of it as something that has kind of come to prominence in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And then to see so many of these people living authentic lives 30 years ago, and the murder, or the diagram, the overlap.
Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't as structured as I thought it was. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is relatively new science.
Sure.
A lot of the words are...
Yeah, although, at least one of them had a full sexual confirmation, surgery. And so it was, or gender confirmation. And so it was really, I don't know, it was fascinating.
Well, I know we've been doing that since roughly the 30s, because it was weirdly, there was a military person, I don't remember enough of the details, but there was a person who's in the military who went to Germany and had the reassignment surgery and came back, and it was this huge look at her now, she's gorgeous, and it was very kind of yep, da 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 da.
Oh no.
Christine Jorgensen, who used to answer to George, creates quite a stir as she returns home to New York from Copenhagen. Christine hit the headlines following the series of operations in Denmark that transformed her from a boy into a girl.
And you're sort of where did the
yeah, where did we go wrong?
I know.
Yeah.
I know almost to the dates. I know when certain political and or religious groups did what that caused which, but we think of history as being self-aware, as knowing its history, or we think of it in the context of history. And it was very fascinating to see this and think, man, when they were filming this was new. This was cutting edge. These are people's lives. They're not characters in a storybook that we read about in school.
Yeah.
And it was very, very interesting.
One of the things I wanted to say, because when we were talking about how there was sort of melancholy, and then we were talking about how a lot of the categories were trying to assimilate as straight men, it reminded me so much of that one moment in the other two where the one guy tells Carrie that he didn't know he was gay, and Carrie says thank you, without even thinking about it.
He says, "Oh, thank you."
When we were watching it, we all literally were like, oh God, because that's obviously the wrong answer, and especially in that scenario, and it just it's a concentration. That moment in that show is a concentration of the feelings in this whole documentary, and it just really it just kind of hurt my feelings, because I was they are all being their authentic selves, and I think they're doing stuff that makes them happy, but it also is they're doing so many things that are degrading that as it happens.
Well, because they're being their authentic selves with nothing to base that off of.
Right.
They didn't have, they had 1 or 2 generations before them, but it's how do you be your authentic self when you don't know what you are?
Right.
And you don't know what's available to you. So there was a lot of defiant, in a positive way, this is me, here I am, I'm going to live my life. But also there was an element of, but I don't know what that is, so I'm still trying to exist within the confines of my reality in a way that I feel only now are we starting to break out of that prison,
Definitely.
To reference, because that's our point of entry is RuPaul's Drag Race, and on top of that, the latter seasons were those people. If you've made it this far, you know that. But it's someone like Gottmik participating in Drag Race, being as good as they were, and as accomplished and as embraced by the fandom. It's that's extremely groundbreaking. And Gottmik himself, he was I didn't know I was an option.
Sure.
Like, I didn't know that I could be a femme trans man.
Right. No, I mean,
And
100%.
it sounds confusing to say it, in passing, but then you watch the show and you're like, oh, like that,
No, it works.
And
yeah.
that was ultimately my goal with this was to know my history and to understand and to pay, respect and homage and the dues to the people, because as is always the case, it is marginalized people of color. It's Black and Latin and transgender people that are forging the way, and then pretty white people like me get to come in and wave from a float, and I can pretend. I can hide. Like, it reminds me of the scene from Into the Woods, which is actually very fitting if anyone wants to fight me on that. I think this is a fitting comparison. But when they're talking about fighting the battle, and the stepmother and stepsisters are like, some people are cut out for warfare and others aren't. And she's like, we don't have the Constitution. And as long as I can be no help, I'm going to hide.
Yeah.
And it's like, they are privileged and have the luxury of hiding while other people have to do the hard work. And that's where I come around to the least we can do is
know that it
is
existed.
acknowledge them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And because I was even able, just with some of my research, to follow a hierarchy, because Pepper LaBeija, who is the mother of the House of LaBeija, which, because at any given moment it's absurd. I'm like, this is just nonsense. But there was such a vast mythos, you know what I mean? There's such 100%. Like a grand like hierarchy and stuff. But Pepper LaBeija was I cannot remember if she was just a daughter or a friend, but she was connected to Crystal LaBeija, who is one of the queens that participates in the 1963 documentary, The Queen.
Oh, okay.
And they talk about how like people of color were like allowed to participate in those beauty pageants, but it was like patronizing. They didn't win. They weren't actually gonna. And so Crystal got mad and she left and started her own house and passed it down to Pepper, and then it's gotten passed down, and there's some of these houses are still around and thriving.
I was gonna ask, because I don't know that in the amount of Drag Race that we've watched, I don't know that we've seen anyone from one of these houses, or is this a different kind of drag than would be on Drag Race still?
No, I mean, I think I think it is. That's outside of my knowledge at this point. Like I said, I do know that some of these houses are still around, and I do know that the documentary Kiki gets into that more.
Okay.
Because apparently there's like, they find the location of like a club that would do the drag balls in like the 20s and 30s. Ooh. And it's since been bulldozed. It's a parking lot, but they erect a tent in the parking lot and they have like a ball there. And in the like clips that I was seeing, you could see that like the families were present, like the biological families, in ways that they were not obviously prior.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the incremental changes with each generation. This stuff, you can get further and further. And like, luckily for us living in this day and age, it's like many of us, not all of us, but many of us do have the support of friends and family. And, that's going back to that's how I was able to survive. It's like,
definitely.
Dorian Corey, she was the stately older drag queen. Was she transgender? I don't remember. Forgive me.
I don't think so. There were a handful that were trans, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Pepper specifically was like,
not.
He was like, I don't want that noise, essentially. And I was like, whoa.
Well, which, to be honest, that's authentic. And that's something that, I'm not going to go into very deeply, but it's like, I had a journey understanding the plight of transgender people. It's like, I always knew it was a thing and I always accepted it because I'm not a judgmental person in that regard. But there was a part of me as a gay man who for, a while there in 2008, 2009, 2010, where I was like, just be gay. Why are you making this so difficult?
Well, it was like, we also watched, almost in real time, we watched Tan France deal with it on the new Queer Eye episodes. And he was very similarly like, I don't understand why there is this extra step. And everybody had to kind of be like, well, it's because something didn't happen right with me, whoever made me, it didn't happen right, and I need to fix it. And I like appreciate that.
Yeah.
Like, the maker, whoever.
I was
However
focused
you
more on the fact that
believe-
you were like, it didn't happen right. I was like, I wouldn't say it that way.
You know what I meant.
No, I know, but this episode is brought to you by terror, by just utter fear. No. But no, that understand is just it. And that's what I mean, where I was like, I always accepted it because I knew a trans woman when I was younger. Her name was Allison. We loved her. She was great. She was hilarious, as you kind of have to be sometimes.
Yeah.
So I obviously accepted it, but I didn't understand it. And it's only been in the last decade where we've actually started, Bill Nye the Science Guy has to come out with Carly Kloss. And suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, I'm starting to like comprehend now.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating to go back and watch, even when they didn't have the language or the research papers or whatever that we do today. It's still there. I mean, there's no mistaking. There's no mistaking what it is they're feeling, what it is they're saying, and the hard lines in the sand,
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes, but
that is, I think, always something really fun about watching older documentaries is a lot of times the language is coarser and, not as, politically correct as we try to be today, but it is, the meanings of everything are always the same. It's like, it's always exactly the same.
Well, and to touch on, again, the plight of transgender people, it's like it's frequently treated in mainstream like it's new, like it's this like almost a fad, and I'm like, it's been there. I mean, it has always been there. But
I mean, I would say it's relatively new that we have like surgical options to the degree that we have now. That's more recent, but
the acceptance.
But people have been, dressing and acting and living their lives as not the gender they were born for as long as there have been people, probably. And it just like kind of blows my mind that, I mean, how many like inspirational stories are there about, girls who dressed like men to join the army for their family and shit, it's littered everywhere. It just doesn't. People are the worst.
So anyways, apparently with Dorian Corey, there is a story that unfortunately we do not know. It is an unsolved mystery.
Okay.
But she passed away in 93, I think. It was complications from AIDS. And they found a perfectly preserved body in her closet, like a mummified human in her closet. And they were able to identify who he was, but we don't know where it came from. He had been dead for like 25 years.
Oh my God.
And there's speculation, but since all parties involved are gone, we don't know. But there's speculation that he was one of her boyfriends or clients.
It's like a rose for Emily.
And he might have, I mean, because again, speculation, but he might have gotten violent and she might have shot him. And then, because what are they going to do? They just
my God.
hid the evidence. There also, apparently there was a note that implied it could have had something to do with a robbery, but it's just this crazy mystery that has never really been solved.
Amazing. I couldn't hope to leave such a crazy legacy behind me.
There's apparently an episode of Pose that is kind of similar, where she's like a dominatrix and one of her clients overdoses, and they like
cover it up,
seal the body in a trunk.
Wow.
But
yeah, because I was gonna say, Jenny Livingston, the director, she is a producer on Pose, which I didn't know until today when I was looking stuff up. But I thought that was pretty cool that she was like involved in this back then, which, I mean, I guess criticism aside, you have to imagine this is like one of the most seminal pieces of work on ball culture.
Certainly, I mean, it was the first that it was mainstream. It was successful, and it was a real taste. Part of that has to do with the fact that in between filming and the release of this movie, Madonna's Vogue came out.
Sure.
She was invited to one of these balls, and it was, I think, Jose Extravaganza was his name. He was the dancer. And she basically took him on, and they did Vogue, and he's been a successful dancer, choreographer. He's worked with a lot of artists and stuff. And so there were things that came out of this, but
yeah. I did wonder the whole time. I didn't go to do any research, but I was like, do they like Madonna's Vogue, or is that appropriating?
But both.
Both?
The appropriation is more recent.
Okay.
Madonna is a complicated figure.
We don't have time to get into Madonna's whole deal right now.
But she was doing work that no one had ever even dared to do when she came out, and her embrace and her respect and love for the queer community and all of that. It was very groundbreaking. And I mean, we are in a little bit of a Miley Cyrus twerking, rather Miley Cyrus was in a Madonna Vogue place. I don't know, but that does tend to happen sometimes. A pretty white woman comes along and puts her name on it, and then it's mainstream.
Sure.
And, Gwen Stefani, what have you. That's a different conversation, because I actually have very, very nuanced opinions about it, because also with a lot of this stuff, there's a part of me that I'm like, such is life. I mean, that is such is the way of things. But no, I did want to single that out. We mentioned Venus Extravaganza. Unfortunately, the movie ends with rather unceremonious news that she had died, that she was murdered.
Yeah.
And in between filming and the release.
While I was watching it, it felt like a very Jules from Euphoria type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was like, if Jules doesn't have a wake-up call, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what it would kind of like go to. Because you're totally right. It was like, she was just very sort of too naive and too ballsy and too like willing to trust everybody, even presumably John's, like, that she was tricking for. And so it's just sort of like, it's just horrible. And that they like were, it was just like a really bad story, because nobody would identify the body. And so they were going to just like cremate her as like a Jane Doe. And yeah, it was just like a real bummer all around.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that, her story is told here, because I know she is one of, countless numbers. Oh, yeah. And it, like I said, I don't know. I want to say something. I don't know what to say that won't sound crass or flippant, but it just, you called it a bummer, and I wanted to say it sucks. And it's like,
no, obviously I like felt a lot of pathos and empathy and sympathy and everything, but
she just was what she wanted to be. She was
100%, yeah,
beautiful. She was young. She was all these things, and it's a very Icarus flying too close to the sun, where it's like, man,
well, it was more like the sun flew too close to her.
Sure,
yeah, because it's like because it gets into like a victim blamey thing, which I don't want to do. I don't want to be like, she was too cavalier, taking John's like wherever they were and like blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I'm just like,
well, in that regard, she was ahead of her time.
Sure.
She was just existing like a human would.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's sort of, it just is like, she was trying to live her life as authentically as possible, and someone didn't like it and shot her. And I just think that's so gross and horrible. And you're totally right. There's countless people that we will never hear about, and the exact same thing happened. And it's only basically through, I guess, like sheer luck and circumstance that we have this story, even remotely told as it is in the documentary. So.
And also, it's what society offers these people, It's like when they don't have, the notion of these families and this culture and stuff, it is the reason why so many of these people survived. But also, you shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to survive. You shouldn't have to get by. If these people had their families and their homes and their communities and stuff, who knows what they could have accomplished.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah, you
know,
shouldn't, like, I think we're both big proponents of found family, but you shouldn't have to completely rely on finding a family, you know?
Well, and also, I mean, who's to say what how healthy the family you find is? I mean,
Exactly.
there's a chilling scene of a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old just hanging out on the corner at 2:30 in the morning, and I mean, I'm gonna venture a guess that they grew up too fast,
way too fast. Yeah,
because I don't think hanging out at 2:30 in the morning is the most serious of their
crimes. Yeah,
yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, of course, I'm glad to have seen this. Frankly, I might watch it again. It felt like the kind of thing that there was sort of a lot to take, and I am a little bit. I'm definitely curious in the other about the other two documentaries, or maybe even more, because there's part of me that wants to know, and then what happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, what's next? And I think it holds up pretty well. I thought it was a good documentary.
Me too. I thought it was great. It's also, I mean, we do both say that from from 2021. We're both white. You know, it's like it's easier for us to say that was a great documentary because we are not involved in that very small microcosm of a culture. But it did not feel disingenuous to me, and it didn't feel mean-spirited, and it didn't feel like anybody was taken advantage of. And that's usually what I get irritated about in documentaries, if those things happen.
Just one last thing I was going to say. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I think it's funny that there were so many things about this that I did know. And again, it's like, I know it from Drag Race, but the opulence, you own everything.
OPULENCE. Opulence. You own everything.
I didn't realize that was from, and they might have said that at the time, but all I can remember is Mercedes Amon Diamond when she was doing the opulence.
Yeah.
You own everything.
The other one is that they kept on saying people's names, and because it's old footage and old audio, they kept on saying Angie, but I thought they were saying Vanjie, and I was like, oh, is that an old drag name that she took? But it was Angie the whole time.
So yeah, let us know if you liked this, or let us have it, either or. And also maybe recommend something else. We're kind of gonna be coming back with the 1999, but I'm a 99, 98, 99, but I'm a cheerleader.
Yep.
Was one of the first gay movies I ever saw. I want to do Shelter, but I feel like that's gonna have to wait for another.
Yeah, we're booked up for June now, I think. But we could do Shelter whenever if you want.
Those are the first gay movies I saw, so not including Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Okay, well, as always, you can follow us on Twitter @SoI'mWatching or Instagram @SoI'mWatchingThisShow. We also have a website, soimwatching.com, which links out to everything, including our Patreon, which we are currently using like a little tip jar. So if you like our content and you want to throw us a couple bucks, you can link out to that from soimwatching.com.
Help us achieve opulence.
Opulence. You own everything.
Yeah, and then other than that, just rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or YouTube or wherever you listen. And that's it for us.